Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Lawyer Trustworthy McJudgy III. Today I'm going to teach you about cookie law. Cookie! Our discussion will revolve around three topics: implementation, user experience, and legal considerations for your specific location. The first entity that I want to take you to is the EURLEX, which is access to European Union law and Directive 2009/136/EC. And I wanted to show you their implementation. And you can see down at the bottom, they have a terrible implementation where these icons are jumbled into their implementation on the bottom. They didn't even properly set the Z layer and hierarchy of their little cookie policy banner on the bottom above all of the icons on their page, so it's making a good mess. It's a horrible implementation. But this site and this page is where you can get the most comprehensive law information about cookie policies and cookie law if you happen to be in the European Union. And lately what happens is I come across websites that they'll have a pop-up window that is their cookie policy, allowing you to accept only essential cookies, accept all cookies, or maybe even refuse all cookies. And you'll notice that from each different website you go to, you have a different implementation of the policy for accepting cookies on their website. Now, the reason why I'm making this video is because most sites are creating a user experience that is just horrible and unnecessary, in my opinion, because I've been looking through the law and I can't find anything in the official law that describes exactly in what way that you should get consent when you want to generate cookies on the user's computer. And furthermore, there are lots of sites that are not even in locations that require you, being the website owner, to get cookie consent. I would say the majority of websites that you go to today that have a very obtrusive pop-up window for the cookie consent right when you arrive, the majority of those websites don't even require cookie consent in the way that they are trying to implement the consent pop-up windows. And I also want you to take note here on their cookie acceptance or consent banner down at the bottom, they don't even have reject all cookies. So if you're going to give the options and be obtrusive about it right when the user arrives to see content on your website, you should give them at least the option to refuse all cookies if you're going to be such a cookie stickler. And don't worry, I'm going to give you guys advice on a better implementation of cookie consent that makes a whole lot more sense than all the nonsense we see online today. Now here I wanted to give you another example of a horrible implementation of a cookie consent pop-up window where they're blocking the content that you came to see with their cookie consent window, or at least partially blocking it. But I've seen a lot of sites where they block almost the entire window or all of the content that you arrive to see. And I'll be honest with you, when I see something like this, I leave the website right away, which means they're going to be losing, even if it's a little bit of traffic, they're going to be losing some traffic. And I've talked to a lot of other people, and they also agree that when they see a very obtrusive cookie policy consent window pop up the first thing when they arrive at a website to see some content, they leave the site right away. And also what it does is it makes people afraid for their security and their privacy when a site first thing is requesting to have access to certain things, when it might not even be necessary right off the bat to request that kind of permission from the user revolving around security and privacy. Now here I wanted to show you an example of a website in the United States, one of the most popular, Google.com. They are based in California, and they have a cookie law in California that is more strict than most other states in the United States. And a lot of states in the United States have no cookie law, but there are a rising number of states For instance, if we type in states that have cookie law in the USA, and the first result says, while the U.S. does not have a federal cookie law, 5 states have adopted their own: California, Virginia, Colorado, Utah, and Connecticut. So if you happen to be wondering, does my state require me to have cookie consent policy? That's something that you want to look into independently for your specific location. Now, my point in using Google.com right now is to show you that they have no cookie policy pop-up. They don't even have a little banner at the top or the bottom to allow you to consent to generating cookies on your computer. But what they do have, or let me show you, just go to Google.com, their homepage, and you'll see down at the bottom, there's privacy. And that little link, when you click it, they talk about cookies and your privacy and security in this link. But nowhere on the homepage or the content that you're looking for do they put a very obtrusive pop-up window or even a banner anywhere that talks about cookies. And like I said, Google is in Silicon Valley. They're in California, so they're under cookie law. It might not be as strict as the European Union cookie law, but it is more strict than most of the states in the US. And you can see even Google themselves has no obtrusive pop-up window or even a banner at the top or the bottom regarding cookies and making people consent right away. It's just hidden down here in their privacy link. So depending on where you are will determine what kind of cookie policy that you have to implement. And you can see Google is getting away with not having a very obtrusive pop-up window or even obtrusive banners for them generating cookies, but they're generating cookies all over your machine. Now, I can't state this strongly enough that you will be losing traffic if you are too obtrusive and too in a person's face right away with your cookie consent policy. You will be losing, maybe it'll even be a small amount of traffic, or it could be a large amount of traffic, but you will be losing traffic if you don't implement your cookie consent policy in a smarter way. And I'm going to explain to you ways that you can do it smarter that will still have you doing everything in a very legal fashion, even if you happen to be in the strictest European Union states. What I believe is happening is that there are sort of like cookie cutter websites or frameworks that offer a cookie consent policy, and people who don't know how to program these things themselves just adopt something like that. So right away when somebody comes to any content on their website, the user gets a very obtrusive and annoying cookie consent policy to either accept or reject cookies, and then they start getting worried about their privacy, and it's unnecessary. So don't worry, I'm going to explain to you a way that you can program your cookie consenting in a much smarter way. This way you won't be losing that, even if it's a little bit of traffic, you won't be losing those people who find it annoying or they start getting concerned about their security and privacy when they're on your website. Which countries have cookie laws? And you'll want to do this kind of search. And especially, let's say you live in Japan or you're somewhere in the Middle East. You'll want to type into Google or whatever your favorite search engine is and type in the name of your country and ask, does it have cookie laws? Then you want to find the official cookie laws for your country or your state. For instance, when I started showing you implementations of the cookie consent policy, we were directly at EUR-Lex, which is Access to European Law. And this is one of the official websites where you can find and read all about the law revolving around cookie consent for your users. You'll want to find something like this for your specific region, country, or state. That way you'll know exactly what is required of you. And like I said, in all of this publication, you won't find anything that tells you exactly how you should implement your cookie consent policy. That's why when we see cookie consent pop-up windows, right when we arrive at a website, they're all done differently at all the different websites. Now, it may be that if you have something like WordPress, there's one universal cookie consent policy pop-up thing that WordPress will program for you. And that would be unfortunate because then you would have no control over how that operates because you have no idea what's going on under the hood of your own website. So here in that result set that we looked for which countries have cookie laws, you can see you'll have lots of results that you can research. For instance, we have the California Privacy Rights Act, the Virginia Consumer Data Protection Act, and these are all U.S. states, Connecticut Data Privacy Act, and I'm lucky because I happen to be in a U.S. state that doesn't really have cookie law that might be as strict as some other states. But here we have the UK, Brazil, South Korea, China, Japan, and the list goes on and on. So you'll want to check for your specific location and dig into what the law actually requires of you. And you'll also want to research what penalties you might incur if you don't get cookie consent and you allow your website to generate cookies on the user's computer. And also, when I was looking through the European Union's cookie law, there are lots of cookies that you could generate that don't require consent. It's only specific kinds of cookies for specific kinds of tasks that you have to get consent for. So as I was reading this, I noticed that there were some cookies you could generate and you don't require consent for those cookies. So this is why I believe everybody is just jumping the gun a little bit because they don't understand the law, they don't understand implementation, and they could be losing lots of traffic and annoying lots of people. And their horribly designed banners, such as this one on the actual European law website, where look at all these icons sitting above those buttons. That shouldn't be like that. All you got to do is set the Z layer in the hierarchy for stacking these banners on the page, and it will be above all of these icons. Whoever's developed the designer for this page is horrible. Okay, so I don't want to bore you guys too much, so I'm going to go ahead and get into ways that you can more intelligently give a better user experience if you happen to be in a region, country, or state that requires you to get consent from the user before your site or software generates cookies on their computer. I'm going to tell you a smarter way that you can go about doing it and still be operating within the law. Okay, now here's the best advice that I can give people to make sure that you're not unnecessarily annoying people or being too obtrusive with your cookie policy consent windows or banners that you might have at the top or the bottom. Because like I said, when people see that right away, they're going to start getting concerned about their security and privacy on your specific website. They might get a bad taste in their mouth and leave right away. And especially if you're blocking the content that they came to see unnecessarily right away when they arrive, they might just leave right away. Because that's what I do. I leave right away when there's a very obtrusive cookie consent window that pops up. Alright, so here you go. This is the best advice I can give you. You don't have to ask for consent until your software or website is about to generate a cookie on their computer. So when they are doing an action or performing an action on your website, or your website needs to do something with the user that requires the generation of cookie on their computer, that is the moment that you can have a window pop up or a banner pop up to get consent from that user. Otherwise, you don't have to have a pop-up window. Because if they're there to see a certain piece of content or material on a certain page, or even if they arrive at your homepage, there's lots of times that your website or your software isn't even generating a cookie on their computer at that point. So if you happen to know programming or know web development, and you understand what's going on under the hood of your machine, then you would have full control to only put up a little pop-up window for consent for cookies at the moment that your software or website has to generate said cookies. Does that make sense? And then you can avoid losing traffic, being annoying, being too obtrusive, or making people scared for their privacy and security online. And honestly, this is all getting way out of hand. The whole cookie pop-up consent thing and these cookie banners, I would say 99% of them are completely unnecessary, and they're delivered to the user experience in an unnecessary time and fashion. Like I just said, you don't have to ask for consent to generate cookies on the user's computer unless your software is right about to generate said cookie. So you don't have to have any pop-up windows unless your software is about to generate the cookie. Now, if your website or software generates a cookie right when somebody arrives, then I guess you have to, and you're forced to have that window there pop up right away. But if you really look into the law, there are cookies that you can generate on the user's computer that you don't need consent for. It's only a certain type of cookie, a certain type of information that would be embedded in that cookie. That's what you have to get legal consent for. So remember that piece of advice. If you happen to be a programmer and a developer that knows what he or she is doing, you don't have to put that pop-up window in their face or banner in their face until your software or website is about to generate a certain type of cookie. And all you have to do is look into the law for your specific state, region, country, whatever, to see what type of cookies that you have to get consent for. And the final piece of advice that I'll give is that there are some harsh penalties if you fail to stay within the legal bounds of consent for cookies. So you'll want to educate yourself. Otherwise, if you don't want to be bothered with it, you're going to have this pop-up thing right away that might be turning people off and annoying people. And I'll tell you from personal experience, I might be a weirdo, but I don't think I'm alone in saying that these pop-up windows are annoying. Now, to me, they're just annoying and I leave right away. But to a lot of people, I would think that they're getting scared and afraid for their security and privacy when they arrive to a new website or even a website that they have visited frequently in the past is all of a sudden now telling them that, hey, for your security and privacy, we have to ask for your consent. That might scare a lot of people off and they'll just leave. So all I'm saying is that it's getting a little bit out of hand and it's getting a little bit annoying and it's ruining the user experience, especially when somebody first arrives to your site. They've never been there before. They could have a ruined user experience right off the bat and then just want to leave. Or maybe not trust your website. Especially if you implement it like this, to where it's ruining the design and the user interface. Look at all these icons sitting above these buttons. And this is the official European legal site that discusses law. And even their developers don't know how to implement this in a nice, pretty way. It looks like crap. So again, if we look at Stack Overflow, it was sold to Prosus, a Netherlands-based consumer internet conglomerate, on June 2nd, 2021 for $1.8 billion. That's why when we go to Stack Overflow, we get this horrible implementation of a cookie consent window when it never used to be there before 2021. And I would bet money that they can implement this in a much smarter way if they had better developers and programmers. They wouldn't have to be blocking all their content or scaring the crap out of people who might not understand what all of this cookie privacy and security is all about. You're probably scaring off a lot of people. Stack Overflow, listen, there are much smarter ways that you can implement this. You don't have to block half of your content. You don't have to scare novices who don't understand cookies, who don't understand privacy and security. There are better ways to do this. Okay, so that's really all I wanted to discuss. I wanted to discuss the user experience being horrible and poorly implemented on most websites, and sometimes completely unnecessary. I wanted to discuss the legal considerations and penalties that you might incur if you don't get consent for certain types of cookies. Like I said, there are types of cookies that you could generate that don't require consent. And I don't think a lot of developers and programmers even know that. And that's something that you're going to have to research yourself if you want to have a smarter cookie consent policy and a better user experience. And we also discussed locations where cookie consent policies are required. And I think if the last little thing I want to say is that if you're going to give a cookie consent banner or pop-up window right away, at least give the user the chance to reject them all and say, I don't want any cookies from your software being generated on my computer. Because I see a lot of these policy consent windows that will say, accept only important cookies or accept all cookies. Give the third option to reject all cookies. Once again, my name is Lawyer Trustworthy McJudgy III. Have a good evening.